I was just a kid holding her umbrella in the rain, nothing more. But the way she looked at me, like she saw something I didn't, changed everything. What happens next will haunt me forever. The rain was relentless, pounding the cracked asphalt of Tilden Street like it wanted to drown the whole world. I stood under the frayed awning of a shuttered deli, my sneakers already sopping, water seeping through the seams and chilling my toes. My hoodie clung to my shoulders, heavy and useless against the storm. I was 23, scraping by as an electrician's apprentice, cobbling together rent money from odd jobs around East Marwood. I'd just finished rewiring a faulty outlet at a townhouse on Cutler Avenue, $60 in crumpled bills stuffed in my pocket, and was supposed to meet Jonas at the Rusty Anchor, a dive bar 2 blocks over. But the sky had opened up, and Jonas wasn't answering his phone. My phone glowed dimly, 6:42 p.m., battery at 9%. No umbrella, no car, no sense to wait out the deluge. I cursed under my breath, pulled my hood tighter, and started walking, the rain stinging my face like tiny needles. Tilden Street was deserted, the sodium glow of street lamps blurring through the downpour, their light fracturing in the puddles. East Marwood, a sleepy suburb just outside the city, felt like it was holding its breath, the houses shuddered against the storm. I kept my head down, focusing on the slap of my sneakers, trying to ignore the cold creeping up my spine. That's when I saw her, a lone figure at the corner of Tilden and Marwood Drive, standing under a flickering street lamp that buzzed like it was on its last legs. She held a black umbrella, cheap and flimsy, the kind you grab at a drugstore for $5. It was doing a lousy job. Her green wool coat was soaked at the shoulders, the fabric dark and heavy, and her boots were caked with mud like she'd been walking for a while. Her hair, dark with a few silver threads catching the light, was pulled into a loose bun, but the wind had tugged strands free, plastering them to her cheeks. She looked older than me, maybe 40, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. There was a quiet weight to her, like she carried something heavier than the rain. She was waving at passing cars, trying to flag down a cab, but the few that hissed by didn't even slow. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was the way she stood there, alone, her shoulders squared against the storm like she was used to being ignored. Maybe it was the rain making me reckless, blurring the edges of my better judgment. I splashed through the puddles, my toolbox banging against my leg, and called out, "Hey, you okay?" She turned, and her eyes hit me like a jolt. Hazel, sharp, and for a moment they pinned me where I stood. There was surprise in them, maybe a flicker of wariness, like she wasn't used to strangers caring. "I'm fine," she said, her voice low but clear, cutting through the drum of the rain. "I'm just trying to get home." "No cabs in this weather," I said, glancing at the empty street. A pickup truck roared past, spraying water, and I stepped closer to avoid the splash. "Where you headed?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the umbrella's handle, the plastic creaking under her grip. "Prescott Lane," she said finally. "It's not far, but—" She gestured at the rain, the wind threatening to turn her umbrella inside out. "My car's in the shop. Didn't expect this mess." Prescott Lane was a 10-minute walk, maybe 15 in this storm. I knew it well. Quiet, lined with old bungalows and maple trees, their leaves now plastered to the ground. I'd fixed a ceiling fan there last month for a retired couple who tipped me with homemade cookies. "I'm going that way," I lied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I can walk with you. Keep the rain off." I nodded at her umbrella, its ribs already bending. Her eyebrows lifted, and for a second I thought she'd brush me off, tell me to mind my own business. But then she gave a small nod, like she was too tired to argue. "All right," she said, "but don't expect me to be chatty." I grinned, despite the cold seeping into my bones. Deal. Her name was Eleanor Hadley. She told me as we started walking, her umbrella barely covering us both. I took it from her, my arm brushing hers as I held it high, the rain drumming against the taut fabric. She didn't protest, just fell into step beside me, her boots splashing in sync with mine. The street lamps cast long shadows, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and earth. I stole glances at her when I thought she wouldn't notice. Her coat hugged her frame, not tight but tailored, and her posture was straight, deliberate, like she'd learned to carry herself through worse storms than this. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said after we'd crossed Marwood Drive, her voice almost lost in the rain. "I can manage." "I know," I said, keeping my eyes on the sidewalk. "But I'm already soaked. Might as well see it through." She let out a soft laugh, barely audible, but it caught me off guard. It was warm, unguarded, and it made her face light up for a moment, softening the lines around her eyes. She was beautiful, not in a flashy way, but in a way that made you stop and look again. Her skin was pale, with faint creases at the corners of her eyes, and her lips, pressed into a tight line most of the time, hinted at something held back, something she wasn't ready to share. "What's your name?" she asked, glancing at me, her eyes catching the light. "Micah Torrance," I said, shifting the umbrella to my other hand. "Eleanor," she said, then added, "Hadley." It felt like she was giving me something, a small piece of herself, and I held on to it. We didn't talk much after that. The rain filled the silence, and I was hyper-aware of her presence beside me. The rustle of her coat, the faint scent of her perfume, something floral and soft. I caught her looking at me once or twice, her gaze quick and cautious, like she was trying to figure me out. I wondered what she saw. A kid probably, with wet hair and a cheap hoodie, nothing special. But the way she looked at me made me feel like more than that, like maybe I wasn't just another guy passing through. "You live around here?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation alive as we turned onto Prescott Lane. The houses were small, their porches sagging under years of neglect, but the street had a quiet charm, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors' names. "Prescott Lane," she said, like that was enough. Then, after a beat, "You?" "Baxter Street," I said. "Crappy apartment, but it's mine." She nodded, her lips twitching like she understood. "Young guy like you just starting out?" "Trying to," I said. "Electrician's apprentice. Not glamorous, but it keeps the lights on." "It's honest," she said, and there was no judgment in her voice, just a quiet respect that made me stand a little straighter. That's more than most can say. I didn't know how to respond, so I kept walking, the umbrella shielding us as best it could. Her house came into view, a gray bungalow with a rose bush out front, its petals battered by the storm. The porch light flickered, casting uneven shadows, and I made a mental note to check it if I ever came back. She stopped at the steps, taking the umbrella from me. Our fingers brushed, her skin cold against mine, and it sent a spark through me, sharp and unexpected. "Thanks, Micah," she said, her voice softer now, less guarded. She shook water off her coat, the droplets catching the light. "You didn't have to do this." "No problem," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets to keep them still. "Get home safe?" She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching mine, and I felt that pull again, like she was seeing something I didn't. I thought she might say more, but she just nodded and turned toward the door. I watched her go, the porch light outlining her silhouette, and something twisted in my chest. A mix of longing and unease, like I'd stumbled into something I wasn't ready for. As I walked back into the rain, my phone buzzed. Jonas, finally. Stuck at work. Rain check. I swore under my breath, the cold biting deeper now, but all I could think about was her. Eleanor Hadley, the way her eyes held me, like she'd found something worth keeping. You don't know what's coming. She's about to turn everything upside down. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air hung heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth and asphalt. I woke up in my cramped apartment on Baxter Street, the radiator hissing like it was mocking me, the walls so thin I could hear my neighbor coughing through a cigarette. My bed was a lumpy mattress on a cheap frame, and the single window looked out onto a brick wall, barely letting in the gray light of dawn. I was 23, piecing together a life from odd jobs as an electrician's apprentice, and my head was still tangled in the events of last night. Eleanor Hadley. Phew. Her name felt like a weight in my chest, heavy and warm, like a stone left in the sun. I lay there, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying it all. The way she'd stood under that flickering street lamp, her green coat soaked, her hazel eyes catching me off guard. The walk to Prescott Lane, her umbrella barely holding up against the storm, and the way our fingers brushed when I handed it back. It was nothing, really, just a walk, a few words, but it felt like more. Her gaze had lingered, like she saw something in me I couldn't name, and it left me restless, like I'd left a piece of myself on her porch. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, 3 missed calls from Jonas blinking on the screen. He'd probably sent another apology for ditching me at the Rusty Anchor. I ignored it, my thumb hovering over the screen, battery now at 62% after charging overnight. I had a job today at the Almond Corner, a coffee shop on Beckman Street, fixing some kitchen wiring. My boss, Hank, had texted me at 5 a.m. Battered 9 sharp. Don't fuck it up. Hank wasn't one for pleasantries, but he paid on time, so I didn't complain. I dragged myself out of bed, the floor cold under my feet, and pulled on my work clothes, jeans, a faded flannel, and boots scuffed from months of crawling under houses. My toolbox sat by the door, a battered metal thing that used to be my dad's, its edges dented from years of use. I grabbed it and headed out, the stairwell smelling of mildew and stale beer. Baxter Street was waking up, delivery trucks rumbling past, a dog barking somewhere down the block. East Marwood wasn't glamorous, but it was home, quiet, unassuming, the kind of place where people kept to themselves. The Almond Corner was a 10-minute walk, all exposed brick and warm lights, with a chalkboard menu boasting drinks like caramel sage latte in curling script. The manager, Theo, greeted me with a lazy grin, his man bun slightly askew. "Lights in the back keep flickering," he said, leading me to the kitchen. "Health inspector's coming next week, so, don't half-ass it." "Got it," I said, setting my toolbox down. The kitchen was cramped, stainless steel counters cluttered with coffee bags and pastry trays. I pried open the outlet covers, the familiar routine grounding me. Check the wires, test the connections, don't electrocute yourself. But my mind kept drifting back to Prescott Lane, to Eleanor, and her laugh, soft and unexpected, like a crack in a wall. The way she'd said my name, like it mattered. I was halfway through tightening a loose wire when Theo brought me a coffee, black and bitter, on the house. "Take 5, he said, already distracted by a delivery guy at the back door. I stepped outside, leaning against the brick wall. the cup warming my hands. Beckman Street was alive now, people hurrying to lunch spots, a couple of kids skateboarding past. I sipped the coffee, the heat stinging my throat, and that's when I saw her. She was across the street, stepping out of Ink and Quill, a small bookstore with a faded sign and a bell that jingled as the door closed. She carried a paper bag under one arm, her navy sweater loose, jeans hugging her legs. Her hair was down today, dark waves falling past her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made my chest tighten. She looked different in the daylight, less guarded, but still carrying that quiet weight, like she was holding something fragile inside her. She was older than me, definitely in her late 30s or early 40s, her face marked by faint lines that only made her more striking. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the coffee, or the way the morning felt too sharp, too real. I crossed the street, my boots scuffing the pavement, and called out, "Eleanor?" She turned, her expression blank for a heartbeat, like she was pulling my face from a memory. Then her eyes softened, and she smiled, a small, cautious curve of her lips that hit me like a punch. "Micah," she said, her voice testing the name like she was surprised to see me. "What are you doing here?" "Fixing some wiring," I said, nodding toward the almond corner. "You're not far from home, so I guess it's not that weird running into you." "Not weird at all," she said, shifting the bag to her other arm. "I come here a lot. They've got a good poetry section." Her eyes flicked to mine, and there was a spark there, like she was daring me to say something. "Poetry," I said, raising an eyebrow, trying to keep it light. "Didn't take you for the type." She laughed, sharper this time, and it sent a shiver through me. "And what type did you take me for?" I shrugged, my face heating up. "I don't know, someone who's got it all figured out, maybe." Her smile faded just a fraction, and she looked away, toward the street where a bus hissed by. "Looks can fool you," she said, almost too quiet to hear. Then she met my eyes again. "You're not done with that job yet, are you?" "Almost," I said, "just taking a break." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the bag. "If you've got time, I could use some help at the house. It's nothing big, just the porch light, it's been flickering. I tried a new bulb, but it's still acting up." I should have said no. Hank would skin me if I fell behind, and Theo was already eyeing me from the coffee shop door. But her gaze held me, steady and searching, and I couldn't look away. "I can take a look," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Lead the way." We walked back to Prescott Lane, the bookstore bag swinging at her side. The silence between us wasn't awkward, but it was heavy, like we both felt the air shifting and didn't want to name it. Her house was just as I remembered. Gray bungalow, rosebush drooping, porch steps creaking under my weight. She unlocked the door, holding it open, and I stepped inside, the scent of wood polish and something faintly sweet hitting me. The living room was small, warm, with a leather couch worn soft at the edges and a bookshelf crammed with paperbacks. A framed photo on the mantel caught my eye. Eleanor younger, smiling beside a man with his arm around her. I didn't ask, but the quiet of the house told me he wasn't here anymore. "It's out here," she said, leading me to the porch. The light fixture was ancient, its glass cover cracked, the wiring a mess of frayed insulation. I set my toolbox down, the familiar clank grounding me, and got to work. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching me with that same intensity from last night. "Probably a loose connection," I said, more to fill the silence than anything. My fingers moved on instinct, stripping wires, checking for faults. "Won't take long." "You're good at this," she said, her voice soft but sure. Confident. I glanced at her, my hands pausing. Still learning, I said. Hank says I've got a ways to go. You don't give yourself enough credit, she said, and there was something in her tone. Curiosity, maybe, or something heavier. Not many people your age would stop to help a stranger. I shrugged, focusing on the wires to hide the heat creeping up my neck. Didn't seem right to leave you out there. She didn't say anything, but I felt her eyes on me, steady and unyielding. My hands fumbled, the screwdriver slipping, and I cursed under my breath. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across the fixture, and I caught her scent again. Floral, soft, like spring trapped in winter. You live here alone? I asked, then winced. Too forward. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quieter, like she was stepping into dangerous territory. For now, my husband. He passed 3 years ago. Car accident. It's just me in the house. I'm sorry, I said, my throat tight. I kept my eyes on the wires, giving her space, but the air felt heavier now, like her words had settled between us. It's all right, she said, but her voice cracked, just enough to notice. You learn to live with it, or you try. I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. The light flickered as I tightened a connection, and I felt her shift closer, her presence like a current running through me. You're good with your hands, she said, and there was a warmth in her voice, a softness that hadn't been there before. I looked up and our eyes met. Hers were steady, searching, like she was daring me to cross a line. My pulse hammered, and I couldn't tell if it was the work or her proximity. The air between us felt alive, charged, like the moment before a spark jumps. There, I said, stepping back as the light glowed steady. Fixed? She smiled, and it was different. Open, unguarded, like she was letting me see her for the first time. Thank you, Micah, she said, her voice low. You didn't have to do this. Happy to? I said, my voice rougher than I meant. I grabbed my toolbox, ready to leave, but she touched my arm. Light barely there, but it stopped me cold. Her fingers were warm, and the contact sent a jolt through me, sharp and undeniable. Stay for a coffee? She asked, her eyes still on mine. It's the least I can do. I should have said no. Hank was waiting, and Theo would rat me out if I didn't get back soon. But her hand was still on my arm, and her gaze held me like a tether. Yeah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'd like that. What she says next will break every rule. And he's not ready for it. The kitchen was warm, the kind of warmth that wraps around you like a blanket, heavy with the scent of fresh coffee and something sweeter. Cinnamon, maybe, or vanilla baked into the air from some forgotten recipe. Eleanor's house felt alive in its stillness, every creak of the floorboards and hum of the refrigerator telling a story of years lived here. The table, a small oak thing scarred with scratches, sat against a window overlooking the soggy rose bush, its petals bruised by last night's rain. Afternoon light slanted through the blinds, painting golden stripes across her hands as she set 2 mugs down. 1:10. I sipped the coffee, the heat searing my tongue, and tried not to wince. It was good, strong, with a faint nutty aftertaste, but I barely noticed. My heart was pounding too loud, a steady drumbeat in my chest. Her touch, those few seconds her fingers grazed mine when we brushed hands on the porch, still lingered like a current running under my skin. I wanted to say something, anything to keep this moment from slipping away, but my throat was tight, my thoughts a jumble. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, studying me with a curiosity that felt like a challenge. "You're not what I expected, Micah Torrance," she said, her voice low, almost teasing, but with an edge of something deeper, something that made my pulse quicken. "What meddling with wires checking connections?" I nodded. "Yeah, probably. I'll let you know if I find anything bigger." She smiled, a small private thing, like she was sharing a secret with herself. "You've got a good eye," she said, her tone shifting softer now, like she was letting me in. "Not many young guys would stop to help someone like me in the rain. Most would have kept going." I shrugged, my face heating up. "Didn't seem right to leave you out there," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out rougher than I meant. Her gaze held mine, steady, like she was waiting for me to say something more, something real. I looked away, focusing on the coffee, the steam curling up like a ghost. The silence stretched, heavy, charged, therapy red eyeshadow, her hair catching the light in a way that made me pause. I wanted to ask about the photo on the mantel, about her life, her loss, but I didn't. The words stuck in my throat, and I focused on the wires again, twisting the screwdriver in my mind like I was trying to untangle my own thoughts. "You live here alone?" I asked, then immediately regretted it. Too personal. Too soon. Her eyes flicked to the floor, and she didn't. "You're young," she said, her voice soft but cutting through the noise in my head. "You've got time to figure things out." "Doesn't feel like it sometimes," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. I looked up. Hawkins, I thought, but my hand stayed steady on the wires. "I'm just trying to keep my head above water here." She tilted her head, her gaze softening, like she was seeing something in me I hadn't noticed in myself. "You're not stuck," she said, and there was no pity in her voice, just a quiet respect. "You're here, fixin' lights, walking strangers home in the rain. That's not nothing." The air felt heavier now, like the storm had followed us inside, charged with something unspoken. I wanted to ask her about the man in the photo, about the silence in her house, but I didn't. Instead, I said, "This place feels like it's got stories." Her smile faded just a fraction, and she looked down at her coffee, her fingers tightening on the mug. "It does," she said, her voice quieter now. "Like Hawkins?" I nodded, trying to keep my eyes on the floor. "It's just me in the house," she said, and I felt her pull me back in. "My husband, David, loved this place. We bought it 10 years ago, right after we got married. He used to sit right there, where you're sitting now, reading the paper, complaining about the neighbor's dog." I waited, not pushing. The clock on the wall ticked, a steady rhythm matching my heartbeat. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle, the sound faint but carrying. "He passed 3 years ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Car accident, quick," they said, like that makes it easier. "I'm sorry," I said, my throat tight, the words feeling too small for the weight of her loss. I kept my eyes on the wires, giving her space, but the silence between us grew heavier, like the air before a lightning strike. She shook her head like she was trying to shake off the memory. "You learn to live with it," she said, her voice steady but thin, like a thread about to snap. "Or you try to." I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. The light flickered as I tightened a connection, and I felt her shift closer, her shadow falling across my hands. "You're good with your hands," she said, and there was a warmth in her voice now, a softness that hadn't been there before. Her words landed like a spark, igniting something in me I couldn't name. I looked up, and our eyes locked again, Longer this time, her gaze steady, almost too steady, like she was daring me to cross a line I wasn't sure I could see. My pulse hammered, my hands unsteady on the wires. The air felt alive, electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. "There," I said, stepping back as the light glowed steady. "No more flickering. Should be good now." She smiled, and it was different this time, open, unguarded, like she was letting me see her for the first time. "Thank you, Micah," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "You didn't have to do this." "Happy to," I said, my voice rougher than I meant, the words catching in my throat. I picked up my toolbox, ready to leave, but her hand brushed my arm. Just a light touch, barely there, but it stopped me cold. Her fingers were warm, and the contact sent a jolt through me, sharp and undeniable, like a wire I'd just stripped bare. "Stay for a coffee?" she asked, her eyes still on mine, her voice soft but steady, like she was offering more than a drink. "It's the least I can do." I should have said no. Hank's text was still burning in my pocket, and Theo would probably snitch if I didn't get back to the almond corner soon. But her hand was on my arm, her gaze holding me like a tether, and I knew I wasn't going anywhere. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart thudding like a warning. "I'd like that." What she says next will break every rule, and I'm not ready for it.